Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, and we're going to be providing a general market outlook not only on its USD pair, but also on its Bitcoin pair as well. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Links in the description below. Make sure you check it out. You can lock in that rate. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, we are going to spend a majority of our time looking at this on Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation. And I've tried to explain many times before why looking at cryptocurrencies' valuations on their Bitcoin pairs makes much more sense than analyzing them on their USD pairs. It's all about the risk you're taking on and the potential reward. Okay? Now, you guys, I'm sure at this point, are fully aware of my general outlook on the Ethereum USD valuation. I do think eventually Ethereum will come back in to the lower regression channel. Admittedly, it has taken quite some time, but we still sit just above it, and it continues to slowly trend higher. But what I'd like to do is sort of initially segue over to the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, spend some time there, and then maybe we'll come back to the USD valuation in a bit. So the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, I think, is a very interesting metric to study, mainly because of just how volatile it has been, over the last year. And it certainly seems like there's been a tug of war between the bulls and the bears, with really neither side making much progress, if we're being honest. I mean, you can always look at the bullish case and the bearish case, and admittedly, on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, we spent a majority of our time looking at the bearish case for at least the last 9, 10, 12 months or something. But at the end of the day, not a lot of progress has been made in either direction. And I say that just to sort of be fair to both sides, right? I mean, like, we can claim all we want, but at the end of the day, there hasn't really been a lot of progress made. Okay, I mean, Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation has remained relatively unchanged. Now, with that said, I do feel compelled to sort of remind people that I am of the opinion that before this is all said and done, that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation will come back into lower levels before we can really start to build out a base and head higher in a sustained way. All right. Now, one thing that I want to talk about briefly as well is there's certainly a lot of chatter, and there has been a lot of chatter about the theoretical idea of Ethereum one day flipping Bitcoin. And while I will be the first to admit that that is a potential outcome, I also think it's worth our time to consider the, sobering reality of the fact that despite all the claims, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation was unable to make a new high this cycle. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. Now, I do want us to look at this in a slightly different way in a few minutes, because I think that actually is a bit more compelling or more interesting than looking at it just the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. But if you look back at 2017, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation went to 0.156. And then in 2018, it went to 0.1237. This time we didn't even make it to 0.09. So the idea that Ethereum is showing sustained strength against Bitcoin that it didn't show last cycle is just simply not true. There's really no evidence for that. Now, you might say, well, it spent longer at these higher valuations, and you would be correct in saying that. You can see this has been about 22 months, and this period over here was perhaps only about 15 months. But the counterpoint to that is, the average valuation over here at its peak was probably a bit higher than it has been over here. So I don't really find a compelling reason to think that Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation is showing really any more strength than it did last cycle. And to some degree, you could say it hasn't even quite made it there based on this outlook. Now, there's another outlook we're going to look at that I think is a more compelling way to look at it in terms of it potentially being an oscillator. And you could say that it saw that same type of strength. But again, we'll get to that here in a few minutes. Now, one thing to consider on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, and we've talked about this a few times before, is that if you look at what really has happened here, one of the ways that I talked about this back in 2019, 2020 is the 20-month moving average. Okay, so the 20-month moving average, has historically held as support over here. And the main reason I remember this moving average is because I was watching it quite closely during this time frame. If you were to go back and dig up some of my videos on Ethereum back in the early part of 2020, that was around the time of the Ethereum accumulation phase of a lifetime video and all that sort of stuff. We were watching that 20-month SMA like a hawk because it seemed like every single monthly wick was going right up to that 20-month SMA and then ultimately getting rejected. And the argument was, all right, we're building up to it. We should eventually break through. And once we do, we're off to the races. And you can see that that's what happened, right? We broke through it. We came back down, held the 20-month SMA as support, and then went on this crazy journey where we continue to go up much higher. I'm sure many of you guys remember, the December 2020 video at the very end of 2020. It was called Ethereum. Remember the end of December, because at that time, Ethereum was like $700. Bitcoin had already taken off. And it was like, well, why is Ethereum not keeping up with it? And the argument was that Ethereum tends to outperform in Q1. So we'd likely see, Ethuary or Ethuary, where it outperforms. And then we would get the Ethereum tsunami after everyone wants to convert their altcoins out, or after we get to the point where everyone wants to convert their ETH to alts. That's really the time to convert your alts to ETH. And then you got the Ethereum tsunami, where it essentially goes up 2x in approximately 2 weeks. So we saw all that play out. Now, once all of that played out and we reached this level back at the end of 2021, and once we got into early 2022, I really took on a different stance. And that stance was, look, I don't really think that this is going to be sustained forever, right? Like, I don't think we're going to continue to push up too much higher from these valuations, right? Like, we had our chance to get up here, but it just didn't happen. And then we came back down, and I thought we would break back down here. We were below the 20-month SMA, but it ended up being a fake out, and we went back up into the merge. Now, I do feel compelled to remind you that just because this was a fake out does not mean it's going to be a fake out over here. If you look, we've actually already had a full monthly candle with an open and close now below the 20-month SMA, which was not true back over here. So I would argue, again, the much more likely direction for this valuation is down. And that doesn't mean that it's going to go down forever, but I do think we are in that phase where, short to medium term timeframes, the more likely direction for the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is down. And arguably, it's just more so a function of monetary policy and liquidity, but also potentially some regulations that might hit Ethereum in different ways than Bitcoin might be hit. I do think Ethereum will eventually rise from the ashes on its Bitcoin valuation, but I seems like it's kind of rolling over. If you look at the 20-month SMA, sort of draw a line across, you can see this is around the same level that the 20-month SMA started to curl back over last time, right? It's starting to curl back over here. So I think, I really do think we're going to see this come back in. Now, there's two different ways we can look at this and that I would consider realistic. Okay, so there's three ways that you could theoretically look at it. The third way, of course, is that you might think that it's just going to be another fake out and pop back up. I do find that case to not be so compelling. So I'm going to focus on two other cases. One case is the idea that this is a logarithmic regression trend, not that dissimilar from Ether USD, where you fit this to quote unquote non-bubble data, and we eventually just come back into this valuation eventually. Now, we haven't done it yet on its USD pair, although I do think it is the eventual outcome that we will see. But if you look at this on the Ethereum Bitcoin pair, you can kind of imagine a very similar type of growth where the more accelerated growth happened early on, and then we just sort of get on this long logarithmic regression channel. So if this is the case, then you might be able to make the case that there's a chance that Ethereum could eventually flip Bitcoin. However, you could also simply make the case that Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation was unable to put in a new all-time high. So what compelling evidence really is there that it has made any progress on flipping Bitcoin in the first place? Why not just assume it's not going to, and that it'll be capped out every cycle around those same valuations? I mean, maybe it's a sobering thought to really have to think about, but look, I mean, we saw it happen twice now, and it was unable to sustainably break higher. The other way to look at this, if you don't want to think about it on a logarithmic regression sort of trend line like this, and by the way, to go back into this a little bit more, if it were to look something like this, then I think you're looking at still the devaluation of Ethereum Bitcoin down to that 0.03, 0.04 level. So that would be what I would consider sort of to be the best case scenario for the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, would be to come back into this level and find support. And I do think that that's at least a worthwhile outcome to consider, right? Like, we shouldn't just discount it for whatever reason, but it is a potential outcome, and we should at least consider it. However, another outcome that is worth considering is the idea that Ethereum is an oscillator against Bitcoin, and that sort of means that rather than continuing its uptrend, it could simply get into a phase where it becomes an oscillator, where it just sort of goes back and forth between a fairly well-defined range. Okay, so you could look at this as being initially capitalized in the early days, followed by just becoming an oscillator and moving up and down, and so on and so forth. So that's one way to look at it. Now, if you call it an oscillator, you might make the case, well, we didn't really go as high as we did last time, so how could we call it an oscillator? It sort of seems like one way that you could look at this is to draw it out like this, right? Not really the best looking oscillator with lower highs and higher lows, right? Like, that wouldn't really be what you might consider to be an oscillator. If it looks something like this, then even still, you're still looking at the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation coming back into that 0.03, 0.04 range. This more so calls for about 0.04, even in this scenario, right? So even in this scenario, I would still expect for it to have to come back down quite a bit before really finding support. But I think there's a better way to look at this. And one of the reasons is because the supply is not constant, and it has not been constant. I mean, Ethereum has gone from, being very inflationary to deflationary and all over the place. So with the supply changing, why do we only care about the price? Because what we should care about is the market cap. If you're talking about Ethereum, where is it in relation to flipping Bitcoin or not flipping Bitcoin? It's more so dependent on the market cap, right? Not like the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation by itself, which is not accounting for the supply. So if you take a look at the Ethereum Bitcoin market cap ratio, this is what it looks like. And to me, this is a much more compelling way to look at the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, is to actually look at the market cap ratios rather than the price ratios. Now, this trend line has actually been on this chart for a long time. I think we drew this trend line actually before this fake out. I've had some people ask me, well, why don't we include this fake out? It was because this was drawn before that fake out occurred. If you go back to my channel in like 2019 and 2020, we sort of drew these trend lines both on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation and on its market cap valuation. And we said, look, it's likely going to remain in an uptrend until 2023. That was what I said back then, right? I mean, you can go look. I said I think it'll remain in an uptrend until 2023. However, it didn't, right? It only lasted until 2021, and that was technically when the uptrend ended. And I sort of threw in the towel on it back in early 2022, and I was like, well, we had a good run. I thought it was going to go higher, but it didn't, and now it's time to sort of turn back the other way. If you look at this on the market cap valuation ratios of the Ethereum Bitcoin pair, is this not a more compelling way to look at it? Could it not be an oscillator coming up into this range, coming down into this range, and then coming back up into this range? The key thing to look at here is this, right? It is looking like it's finally breaking down. It's showing that weakness that it did not show right here, although admittedly it's at a higher valuation, but this trend line is no longer support. Now, we've talked about this a lot within the context of Bitcoin. And the reason is because we've talked about how Bitcoin USD pumps during this phase of the cycle serve a primary purpose. And that purpose is to get altcoins off of their Bitcoin pivot levels, their support levels, so that when Bitcoin goes back down on its USD pair, there's nowhere for these altcoins to hide. Now, again, I will be the first to say again, to remind you, I don't really consider Ethereum an altcoin. I think there's sort of three sectors, right? You have Bitcoin, you have Ethereum, and then you have everything, the altcoin market. I mean, you could also say you have the stablecoin market too, but I do think there's sort of like a distinction between Ethereum and altcoins. I do. Okay. I don't think that Ethereum is the same type of risk that the altcoin market is. The altcoin market really comes and goes. I think Ethereum has proven itself on more than one occasion, and I don't really think it's going anywhere in the grand scheme. But that doesn't mean, I don't have a right to continue to be bearish on it, on its Bitcoin valuation over the short to medium term. I look at this chart and say, look, I mean, to me, it seems like this is going to continue breaking down for months to come. And furthermore, what's really crazy about this chart is that if it's true that it's an oscillator against Bitcoin, it's only just begun the descent, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. I mean, this is, 0.4. Up here it's like 0.5. Down here it's 0.1. It's just something to think about. I'm not saying you have to take it to the bank. I'm not saying it has to come all the way back down here, but there's still a lot of room in here for it to come down. And I mean, you could see over here it came down and then battled it out at these levels for a while, but ultimately it came back into this level. One thing to note, though, is that when it came back into this level, it was when Bitcoin USD was going up, not down. Okay, so I do think that's an important consideration to make as well. Now, we've talked before about how Bitcoin pumps serve as a means to get altcoins off their Bitcoin support levels, so that when Bitcoin USD goes down, the altcoins have nowhere to hide. And I think you're seeing that play out on this chart. One thing to take a closer look at on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is exactly how it broke down last time. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to zoom in here to sort of this level that it's sort of breaking down from. Okay, and it's right around that 0.073 level. 0.073. I think probably the best comparison is right here at this point. And what you'll notice, and we have to zoom in on this quite closely, but if you overlay, let's see, the Bitcoin USD on this chart, take a look at this. It's kind of interesting. If you draw a line through this wick, or this pump by Bitcoin right here, you can see that Ethereum started its descent on its Bitcoin pair while Bitcoin USD was going up. But then a lot of people might assume that if Bitcoin USD were to go down, that would mean that Ethereum USD would the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation would go back up. But that's not necessarily true, right? And you might have had to learn that the hard way right here. Now, there was 1 week where it was green, just to sort of throw you off, but then it ultimately continued its descent. If you zoom in even closer to pinpoint the day at which the trend changed from Bitcoin USD going up to Bitcoin USD going down, where was the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation at that point, right? Where did it mark the Bitcoin USD local top? What was the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation at? It was between, let's just say, if we can get it more or less exact, right around 0.05. It was on this daily candle, so between 0.0565 and 0.0593, which we're not that far away from. Okay, so remember, Bitcoin USD pumped into the devaluation of Ethereum Bitcoin down to around, let's just take somewhere in the middle, 0.058, 0.057, and from that point, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation continued to bleed, even though Bitcoin, all it did was it came back down to where it was before, and then just went sideways. Even in 2019, if you want to compare it to 2019, if you remember, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation went down when Bitcoin USD went up, right? So look at 2019 right here. You can see that Bitcoin USD went up, Ethereum Bitcoin valuation went down. Furthermore, Bitcoin USD peaked in June, but Ether Bitcoin didn't bottom until September. So you're talking several months of a further devaluation of Ethereum Bitcoin even after Bitcoin USD peaked. And the same thing occurred in 2018 as well, right? Even after Bitcoin USD peaked, you still saw the devaluation of Ethereum on its Bitcoin pair. And so that's why I keep, sort of hammering this idea in, is because, I've been through this before, and I think it's going to play out in a somewhat similar way. And it's interesting too, because, this sort of had, sort of this peak here, and then sort of like a secondary peak. And then this was sort of the last move up before it ultimately broke down. And I mean, you can kind of see that we also had several peaks over here as well. But ultimately, I think the argument is that it's likely going to sort of break down to much lower levels before this is all said and done. And that's why I've said before, like, in the end, even the giants will fall, referring to the cryptocurrencies that have much larger market caps. If you go take a look at the Bitcoin dominance. So if we take a look at the Bitcoin dominance, you can see that it's getting close to breaking out. The argument here is that in order for it to break all the altcoins, or at least most of them, off their Bitcoin support levels, it needs to go above the prior local highs. That's what it took in 2018. Again, the Bitcoin USD pump in 2018 got the dominance up to about 50%. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. We can overlay it on the chart, right? But you can see here, right, like Bitcoin USD was pumping, Bitcoin dominance went up, it took out this prior local high and then continued to go up. Okay, so that, I think, is why it's important to consider that if Bitcoin's dominant, if the Bitcoin dominance can break above 49%, but let's just say 50% just to make sure, then I do think you could see the rapid devaluation of Ethereum on its Bitcoin pair. And from there, a lot of people might assume that the Bitcoin dominance would come back down, but it might just keep on going, just like it did over here, right? Like, it might just keep on going. And I think that's something that we have to consider as a potential outcome. And some of the more fundamental reasons, of course, are because of regulatory risk on the altcoin market. It's not going to affect Bitcoin in the same way. Again, I'm a long-term bull on Ethereum, and I'm excited about talking about the bullish case probably in about 6, 7, 8 months or so. But in this, at this time frame right now, I do remain skeptical, especially of the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. Now, I do want to finalize this by at least briefly mentioning the Ether USD valuation, and I want to talk about maybe more anecdotally about something. Back in 2019, 2020, when I talked about Ethereum USD and we were kind of gearing up for this bull run, and we went up, we went down. I mean, I didn't even start my channel until somewhere over here. But even then, I was pretty open about my expectations about Ethereum USD, and we talked about sort of the downside risk, the upside potential, and we made the Ethereum accumulation phase of a lifetime video right here, the reaccumulation phase of a lifetime video right here, and the rest is history. And it ultimately led into a bull run that from the bottom was almost a 6,000% move, right? Like a 5,700% move or so, 5,600%. And that is really, what you're looking for, or at least maybe I should say that's the type of move that I'm looking for. Over the last year, the bulls and the bears have sort of been at each other's throats, and we've just been in this narrow little range. Yes, Ethereum has gone up over, about 2x or so from its low, but at the end of the day, a lot of people are not here for those types of moves. They're here for sort of the paradigm shift type of moves, where you capitalize it to a completely new level that was previously unimaginable. Now we just have people fighting over whether Bitcoin's at $1,400 or $1,700. And one of the issues I find with that is back in 2019 and 2020 when we talked about Ethereum, no one really cared if I put out a video suggesting it could go lower. I remember distinctly, we were all just sort of like, I think most of us were just sort of so apathetic after what happened in 2018. And remember in 2018, the entire market dumped like 50, 60%, some coins 70, 80% just at the very end of it, right? Like in December. Whereas this time we haven't seen that same level. And so there is a big part of me that thinks, like, because there's so much anxiety in this level, like I think it's much more likely to break down eventually than up. Now, I mean, I'll be the first to admit it's taking longer than I thought it would. But I also don't really feel that same type of apathy in the market now that I did back in 2019 and 2020. Now, imagine this. Imagine if Ethereum were at $600, okay? I know it's not at $600 right now, but just imagine it were. Like, imagine it was at $600 and I made a video and it's at $600 and everyone's just like, oh, it's a 600. And if I put out a video saying, all right, I think it's going to go to 800, You think anyone would care? No one's going to care. And think about if I put out a video saying, all right, maybe it'll go to 500. Do you think anyone would care? No one would care, right? Because it already was devalued so much. So that's where that apathy sets in. And from those sorts of positions, I feel like you can build into true bull markets where you can see these types of returns from true levels of apathy that we experienced over here and that we experienced, in these levels. But it's hard for me to get on board with the idea that the market is truly apathetic when I can't put out a video saying, Ethereum might go down without it really making a lot of people upset. Okay, I mean, look, we all have our opinions. Some people think Ethereum's going to new highs this year. Some people think it's going to zero. I don't think it's going to zero, but I think that you will likely see a rollback over eventually. And as a reminder, again, it's taking longer than I thought. I'm not trying to pretend that it's not. It is. But I still don't feel that same type of apathy that I felt back over here. It feels like there's just so much angst in the market, right? And everyone is at each other's throats. If you're a bull or a bear, everyone's just arguing constantly about ultimately which way it's going to go. So that's at least one anecdote I'll put out there. It's not really scientific or anything like that, not data driven. And maybe it's certainly something you shouldn't take to the bank. But again, I would feel more comfortable being more bullish on assets like Ethereum if it were possible to put out a video talking about the downside risk without seeing all sort of the negativity surrounding that sort of viewpoint. And it doesn't really remind me of 2019 or 2020 just yet. But I imagine that if it were down here, the apathy would really set in, and then it would remind me of that phase. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see if it comes in. I mean, it's either going to go there or not. If it doesn't, then it doesn't, right? I mean, if it doesn't come back down, then I was wrong about it coming back home. But I still am in the camp that Ethereum USD will eventually break down to these levels. And I think you can see if you look closely, Ethereum has been showing a lot of weakness recently. And when Bitcoin has continued to push up, Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation has been getting very, very weak. And unfortunately, this time it doesn't really have the merge to point to as to sort of generate hype. In fact, we just are staring in the face of a potential recession rather than an immediate new bull market. So that's where I currently stand on Ethereum. I think that the devaluation of Ethereum on its Bitcoin pair is very much underway. It doesn't mean that it's not going to occasionally pop back up, but I wouldn't really be surprised to see something like that play out. So just something to consider as we continue to navigate the cryptoverse. And then the one last thing that I will remind you of is if you overlay the Ethereum dominance over Bitcoin dominance, you can kind of see how the ebb and flow, right, of these two blue chip cryptocurrencies. Okay, so the dominance of Bitcoin went down, this is the Ethereum dominance, right? So the Ethereum dominance went down here, and the Bitcoin dominance went up here. And then let me change the color. So then up here, the Ethereum dominance came up here, and then the Bitcoin dominance was down here. So I just think we're going to come back to sort of this phase over here where the Bitcoin dominance comes back up this way, but the Ethereum dominance comes back down this way. And it's just like the cyclical nature of the cryptoverse, right? I mean, so that's ultimately what I think is sort of the most likely outcome. So we'll see if it plays out or not, but we'll take it one day at a time. Let me know what you guys think of the analysis in the comment section below. Make sure you subscribe if you're not subscribed. Give the video a thumbs up. And again, we do have the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Links in the description below. See you next time. Bye.